Welcome, everyone. Another great episode. We're talking about fears in retirement, common fears that most retirees have. What are they? How do you solve them? We're going to tackle all of that today, Kevin. We're promising folks 4, so why don't we just jump in with fear number 1 here in terms of a very common fear people have in retirement. I'll throw this up and let you run through it.
Yeah, no, it's probably the biggest fear that we ever get from everybody else. All everybody wants to know is, am I going to run out of money before I die? And of course, that's a subjective thing to talk about. A, we don't know when you're going to die. So B, we have to make sure that we start planning for that. But it is a really big scenario for a lot of people. They want to know what they're going to need, how they're going to survive, what kind of things. And again, this all comes down to trying to find out, well, what's your budget and things along those lines? What have you looked at? What do you think that you can deal with? A realistic budget pre-retirement is always a good idea. And then tweaking that in retirement becomes the big things. That way, at least if you know what you're going to be spending, it gives you a chance to try and analyze how much you think you're going to need when retirement comes, and also helps you plan when you can retire in that sort of aspect, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I should mention the retirement fears are kind of piggybacking on the research here from secondwindmovement.com. So secondwindmovement.com came up with a list, and we're kind of talking our perspective on those lists, and running out of money was top of that list of retirement fears. We have a whole video on how not to run out of money, so we'll link to that video, so you can always click on that. And Kevin, you hit the nail on the head with one of the first tips on how not to run out of money: proper budgeting. There's the pre-retirement budget, which is likely going to be based on your lifestyle. Like what's your current lifestyle? What are you spending now? It's a pretty good gauge for what you'll do in retirement, because we're creatures of habit. And then in retirement, like you mentioned, you do the tweaking, right? You live retirement a year or 2 years, and then you adjust. And then you get a pretty good realistic budget. And if you have that nailed down, well, it's going to be hard to run out of money, because then you can properly plan, right? If you know what you spend, you can do some better forecasting, and you can actually build around that proper financial plan. A second tip on how not to run out of money in retirement, how to alleviate that fear, has to do with time horizons. And I get it. There's lots of marketing about retirement being a big event. You get there, you check that box, and it's done. But of course, that's not how it works. Retirement's a process, and it could be a couple of decades in retirement.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. It depends on when you retire, and then what longevity of life is. I mean, I've had so many people that come, you know what, 80 is a good enough time to project. Well, no, I mean, the average person is living into their mid to late 80s nowadays, if not into the 90s. And again, the turn of the 20th century, you were lucky to live 50 years. Now you're living almost 90 years, and it's going to get longer and longer and longer. It's just the way that evolution has gone with it. So having a realistic time frame is what you really need to do. So planning out for more time is a better scenario than planning for less time, because the last thing you want to do is outlive the money, especially if you've got that plan there. So having a realistic plan, and again, that'll all depend on when you retire. I mean, are you retiring at 60, 65, 70? That way it'll help you deal with those things, and then come forward as to how you're going to have enough money to survive.
Yeah, and the realistic time horizon impacts a number of things. Obviously, it's going to impact the budget, how much money you need. If you're going to be spending for 20 years or 25 years versus just 5 or 10, right? That's going to be an impact. And it also filters into the other parts of your plan. If you have a realistic time horizon, let's say you're using 20 or 25 years, well, inflation over that time period can have a big impact. Even if inflation's small, even if it's only 2 or 3% over a 25-year period, that adds up quite quickly. So you're going to have to account for that as well. So that realistic budget, realistic timeframes, if you have those two, work them into your plan, well, likely you're not going to run out of money, because you have lots of tools in your toolbox to handle that. Let's move on to fear number 2 here, Kevin, again from secondwindmovement.com. Fear number 2, declining health, right? Unfortunately, when we age, when our body's not like it was when we were 22, it gets a little different, and that's a big fear for many retirees.
Yeah, that becomes a bigger one. I mean, a lot of people want to retire earlier all the time because, I'm active, I can do all these things. I might as well get them done, because I'm going to hit a certain age and then I can't do anything at all and I have to worry about it. Well, we are getting longer and longer in years, and we are maintaining our health going forward. But again, there are certain things you can't control. If you have a family history of something or things along those lines, that has to be worked into your plan, as though this might be an option. But getting around that declining health fear is doing things that would be more inclined for you to live longer. Whether that's increasing or making a better diet for yourself, maintaining a healthy exercise of some format while you're in those retirement years, you can get that longevity and everything else that can help you alleviate your declining health.
Yeah, it's shifting the focus, right? The fear, so we're talking about retirement fears, the fear is the declining health. Well, it's like you mentioned, some things are outside of our control. So we got to focus on what we can control, which are going to be the habits. It's going to be the exercise. It's going to be what we eat, and then of course living in the moment as well, right? As much as you can to kind of enjoy the moment and less concern about the future. Well, I mean, that's hard to do that, but the more you can do that, the less this is going to be a concern, and the more enjoyment you get in general out of retirement. And then we'll move on to fear number 3 here, Kevin. And this is a big one, and I think it could be one not everyone expects, right? Because it's a honeymoon phase, right? We got the date circled on the calendar. Retirement's going to be grand. When I retire is an often a saying. When I retire, I'm going to travel. When I retire, I'm going to spend more time with the grandkids. Whatever it is, then you get there, and the reality might not live up to the expectations. It can be a little bit of a struggle to find the new routine. Maybe you find yourself feeling a little lost or maybe a little bored. That is a key fear, and that's actually one that might surprise a few folks.
Yeah, because I mean, you work your whole life and okay, I'm great. I'm planned for retirement. I'm set. Let's get into it. And of course, the first while, as you mentioned, the first part of retirement is vacation. It's like an extended vacation, and that's what you look for. I don't have to worry about going back to the office. I can sit and do this. I can relax. I don't have to do anything. But as you get further in, you're going to find more and more that there are phases. Ashley's model of retirement adjustments gives us 6 of those. Pre-retirement, honeymoon, disenchantment, as you're seeing from there. But again, one of the reasons is that after a certain period of time, this is no longer just vacation anymore. This is your lifestyle. And that may have a detrimental effect on some people who don't have that plan going forward. And it's important that you try to figure out exactly where it is and what's going on with that scenario for you, because that's going to help you maintain going forward. This is a different phase of your life now. You're no longer working man or working woman. You're a retired person. And that can have a big effect as to how you live your life going forward.
Yeah, and I'll explain what's on the slide here. Ashley's model, you already hinted at. There's lots of steps in that adjustment process. Robert C. Ashley was a sociologist in the 70s and 80s. He came up with this model. He viewed retirement as getting into a new role in life. And like any new role, there's going to be adjustments. It's going to be a bit of a process. And he had 6 steps as part of that adjustment process. You can see them on the slide there. Reitz and Moutran, the bottom part of the slide, they did a study. They followed people around for 2 years and tried to assess their attitudes and how things changed, and their data kind of lined up with Ashley's model. They had their own model, which was quite similar. They only had 5 steps, though. Ashley had 6, but the general premise here is quite similar. And I'll pull up the data here for you, Kevin. This is from Reitz and Moutran, when they followed folks around for about 2 years, and you can notice a trend here. The people's attitudes toward retirement, it kind of starts off quite high, 6 months into retirement, that honeymoon phase, and then you see a bit of a crash, an adjustment process, we'll call it. And then you do see the reorientation phase, getting into the new role, and you can see a recovery and people more happy, more enjoyment with the new routine, but it's not quite at the peak, right? That peak's a little unrealistic. Like that's the permanent vacation mentality. So you can see the data kind of bearing out that adjustment process. And I think what you mentioned earlier is key to that. Is for some folks, this can be a big life event. It can be a big transition, and there can be a struggle there to try to feel a little lost, find that new identity. I think part of it is just realizing that could be the case. This is going to be a process.
Yeah, and that's the biggest factor, right? Because everybody's got that honeymoon phase where it's great. It's 6 months of retirement. But after that, you start to realize that even though I'm in retirement now is my new job. And I have to have something to do with it, as it were. I hate to put it that way, but that's what you're doing. I mean, you can't continue the honeymoon phase, because eventually you realize that you've done something for maybe 30 or 40 years. You're going to need something in this second act of life to be able to deal with that going forward as well. And that is a huge adjustment for some people, whether that's volunteering, whether that's spending more time with family, or whatever the case may be. You need that sort of, okay, this is what I've got to get out of bed in the morning for. This is what I want to do, but I'm going to do it on my time frame and things along those lines. So yeah, it can be a very big event. And some people just don't realize how big event it is. So make sure that you pre-plan that and you have some sort of an idea as to where you want to go going forward.
We should mention we have lots of videos on this as well. We'll link to one of them if you want more on this particular topic. But this was one of the 4 fears mentioned, so we did want to bring it up. And if people have more questions on this or any other topic, Kevin, where should they go?
They should go to chatwithclintonandkevin.com. We have more than enough sitting there to be able to answer your questions, hopefully on this topic or any of the other topics we've ever done. Or if you just have basic financial questions, we'd love to hear from you. And by all means, give us that information and we'll get back to you as quickly as we can. After that, though, we start moving on to other phases, don't we, Clinton?
Fear number 4 here on the 4 retirement fears we're addressing. So we're coming to the back end of the video here. And this is, it's a tough one. The death of a loved one is never easy, and it is a common fear. You're going into retirement, you're both aging. Well, what if my partner passes away? In this, of course, it's going to be a chaotic mess. The grieving process is not easy, but it's less about the actual event. We're focusing on the fear of the event, right? Because that can be tough. That can actually create some anxiety, that can create some worry, and it can kind of interfere with some of the enjoyment of retirement if you're fearing this potential event. But I think, like we mentioned earlier, some things are outside of our control, and we kind of have to focus on what we can control, have a bit of gratitude, focus on the current day, and try to make the most of that. Would you agree with that kind of mentality?
Yeah, that's the biggest factor. I mean, a lot of these ones that we mentioned, they're fears that this is going to happen or this is going to happen. We know that certain things are going to happen down the line, but what you have to do is you've hit that retirement phase. Live for the day is more or less what you need to do. And that's the biggest factor, whether that's spending more time with grandkids, whether that's volunteering, whether that's participating in more events that are exercise oriented or volunteering. Those are the big factors to be able to deal with. That's what's really going to keep you moving forward. Don't worry about what may happen down the line. Worry about where you're at the moment. And again, death of the spouse, don't fear that right now. It's something that may come down the line for you. But again, that's something that if we don't think about it right now, that's going to help to alleviate what we want to deal with going forward.
Yeah, shifting the focus for what we can control and trying to make the most of that, right? It's never easy, but ideally it's the best way you could try to handle the fear of that type of event. Covered lots in this video. If you like this kind of content, we have more like it. For example, there's a video likely floating over Kevin right now called, what happy retirees do differently. Feel free to click on that and we'll see you there. Take care, everybody.
Take care.